All right, it is 4:30 and this is the Joint Review Board meeting. It is November 12th, 2024, and we are in City Hall Council Chambers. I'll have the roll call called by City Clerk Anderson Mull.
Okay, Mayor Haas,
Present.
Chet Strebe, did you say?
Strebe, here.
Strebe. Shannon Murray? Here. Renee Krieger? Here. And Pete Koblitz?
Here.
Everyone's accounted for.
Next, we have appointments as needed. Public member. We have Pete Koblitz as our public member. Do you need a vote on that, or?
Yeah, I think we should take a nomination and
Okay.
and a vote.
I'll nominate Pete Koblitz as the public member. I have a motion and a second to nominate Pete Koblitz as the public member. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next, we have appointment of chairperson.
Going to third page, can I nominate you, Steve?
Yes.
I'll nominate Steve Haas, Chair.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second to nominate Mayor Steve Haas as chairperson. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. Next, we have agenda items for consideration, and this part of the meeting, I'll turn it over to Brian from Ellers. Well, could everybody turn their mics on and speak into the mics when they do talk? Thank you.
All right, I think I got that part taken care of. Yep. Not real loud, but that's okay. Good afternoon to you all, / early evening. Brian Riley with Ellers. We work closely with the city on matters associated with tax increment financing, and are here today to kind of support the agenda in terms of the various amendments, the 2 extensions, as well as the required annual meeting of the Joint Review Board. I think the agenda has the annual meeting requirement first, or at least the review of the PE 300 reports. Those have been provided and are also available electronically. They tend to not be very useful for discussion purposes, and from a forecast perspective, they largely look backwards in time, much like an accounting framework. There's a little bit of forward-looking aspect to it, but it's really not informative to where any particular district stands. So we did prepare a supplemental handout for everybody to kind of walk through. That's more of a cash flow type forecast, which we'll leverage for this purpose, and I'm happy to answer questions along the way as well. Emily has various accounting detail and other financial statement detail. If you wanted to talk through any of that or otherwise want it available to you, it can be made available as well. So if it's okay with the mayor, if questions come up, but just have people ask them. Otherwise, there's no reason to wait till the end. So if you're okay with that, Mayor?
That's fine.
Very good. Sorry, chairperson in this regard. So. All right, so there is some small numbers, I understand that, but really trying to get everything on one page, and we're trying to present a complete profile for each tax increment district, and I'll just go in number order. Again, questions, let me know. I'm happy to address them as we go along. TID number 3, this is the oldest vintage district in the city and is approaching the end of its unextended life. TID 3 was created in 2005 as a mixed-use district, and I'm going to walk through this first one in great and gory detail, just because everything that follows is the same framework. So once I set you up with how this is set out, I think you'll be able to follow in pretty short order. So I'm looking at the detailed information in the upper left, and as a mixed-use district, that's a 20-year unextended life. And if you're just kind of following along, you'll see that this district is outside of its expenditure period. And just know that from an expenditure period perspective, for all tax increment districts, the expenditure period expires 5 years prior to the maximum termination date. That date is 20 years on the anniversary of the creation date, or the date that the council took action to create the district. So this district was created September 13th of 2005. That means it must be terminated by September 13th of 2025. And then that would also mean that the final year of revenue collection for this district on an unextended basis would be 2026. And so this district, the expenditure period for this district ended September 13th of 2020, all right? So essentially, we are in runoff mode, and ostensibly, this district is in fine shape. There was some degradation in the captured value for the district, and here's where I'll walk you through the fiscal profile, right? So we are in revenue year 2024, and the reason why we show 3 years on some of these, I apologize, not every single one. I tried to make it a little simpler, but we also use this framework for some disclosure purposes, and not trying to monkey around with it too much. So typically, there's a lag between construction and then receipt of tax revenue, and most typically, that's about a 2-year lag. Construction, then valuation, go on the tax rolls, then collect taxes in the following year. We're in revenue year, fiscal year 2025. The captured value for taxes payable next year is just over $29 million. When we're doing this forecast, we're essentially using the tax rate for taxes to be collected in this period. We don't have the tax rate for all jurisdictions yet for fiscal 25 for the city. All right, and so we have to keep some things constant, so we're keeping the value constant as it stands right now, which is Jan 1 of 24, and the tax rate constant, which is for collect 2025. All right, so if you're going back in time for collection 23, which is the last period for which we have audited financial information, the value was $42,396,000, right? Collected $991,000 plus in tax increment revenue for 24. $52,300,000 collected, just over $1,150,000. All right, so that's the revenue side, and then from there we take it through the expense side of the ledger. There are a few issues of bonds outstanding. We have a 2020 series of tax increment revenue bonds, the payments for which approximate about $735,000 a year. The last year of payment on those will be in 2026, and there are some dollars set aside as additional security for that debt that will be applied in that year as well that aren't really shown here. So we're showing the net payable from tax increment revenue on this page. As you're going from left to right, this district is also a donor, an eligible donor to tax increment district number 8. That will show up again in some of our prior and some of our subsequent conversation on later agenda items. And so we have mapped out some transfers from TID 3 to TID 8, both through this year as well as out to the end of the life of this district. That's really to support the objectives of TID 8 as an eligible recipient. There are some development agreements outstanding with required payments that are calculated on an annual basis. And then there are typically some other expenditures here and there. There are always some admin costs that we like to at least budget for. That includes staff time. There's audit work that needs to be done. There are certification costs each and every year. Every jurisdiction that has tax increment districts has to write a check to the Department of Revenue to get a certified value, et cetera. So there are always going to be some ongoing administrative costs to every district, and we want to account for that. And so the goal of this cash flow, the way it is built, is not so much focused on annual cash flow in terms of positive balances, because we do have a positive cash balance at the end of 2022. It's to try to provide a source of revenue to meet all of the required payments in the form of debt service, but then also to be a resource for TID number 8. All right, and so effectively what we are doing is drawing down the cash over time to provide that resource to TID 8. So on a forecasted basis, on purpose, I guess from the city's perspective, we're trying to kind of bring down the cumulative balance. Our goal is to close with a positive balance. That means we've recovered all costs, and that includes the transfers to tax increment district number 8, all right? All of the donor relationships are established through an amendment process, which again is on the agenda for a number of the other districts. And so prior joint review boards passed off on those amendments from the donor to the recipient. All right, so that's incorporated into the project plan for the donor district. Any questions on TID 3? I'll go a little faster through the next ones. So I won't have to go through all the level of detail because it's the same framework in terms of how it's built. All right. Okay, TID 4, also a mixed-use district. Remember, that's 20 years on an unextended basis. The dating scheme is really not that much different, although it's in 2007 instead of 2005. So the last year of unextended revenue collection is in 2028, You can see the captured value in the value increment column. Again, the value's been certified for taxes payable 2025, but we have only this year's tax rate, and so we're projecting that forward in time. We do have some debt outstanding. There's a 2017 tax increment revenue bond. There's some general obligation debt payable from TID4, both a issue of GO bonds from 2017 and a state trust fund loan from 2022. There will be a required prepayment of the 2022 state trust fund loan. There's some story and history there, but probably don't need to bore you. The important thing is that that will get paid by the end of the life of the district. And I'll also pause for a moment, just kind of walk through some of the dynamics that are at play in terms of the various TIDs as well. We did go ahead and pay off part of a 2022 note anticipation note. This fiscal year, there was a balloon structure on that. Some of the other districts were also allocated part of that debt service, and those were extended. This one happened to have some cash available, and so we went ahead and paid off its allocable share of that note. TID 4 is an eligible donor to TID 9. There was a transfer in 23. We're not projecting any for 24, primarily because we wanted to focus on debt retirement in this case rather than the transfer. You can see that there are some negative annual balances here that essentially deplete us and arrive at a negative cumulative balance. On the agenda, later on the agenda, is an extension of TID 4 for 3 years, which would remedy that situation. There's a couple dynamics at play. Certainly I'll let Emily weigh in here as well, but you'll see a decline in the value of a number of these tax increment districts, and they are substantial in some cases. Some preliminary assessment filings were made, and we really need a multi-year process to work through. As part of a reassessment, we're expecting that decline would probably get reversed to a good degree as we go forward in time, but we can't really know that to be sure. So as we'll look at that extension later on, you can kind of consider that a bit of insurance on the city side to ensure that all of the costs of this district are recovered. All right, and so there's no obligation to keep the district open that additional 3 years, but there is the opportunity to do that. So we'll talk about that in greater detail when we get to it later on the agenda. All right, no questions on 4. We'll move on to TID 5. They get easier. These older ones have a lot going on. So TID 5, again, also a mixed-use district created on the same date, has very much the same profile as TID 4. As you're looking at this in detail, you'll notice that a series of 2013 bonds has payments that exceed the length of time that TID 5 is open. That's quite similar to actually TID 4. That number is something like $10,000 or $12,000 in terms of the principal balance that's outstanding in 2028. The city will go ahead and prepay that balance. Those bonds are currently subject to optional redemption, and so essentially that could be done at any time, but without knowing exactly when that's going to occur, we didn't try to bake it in any particular year. This district does have a positive cash balance at the end of 22 that should have remained through 23 and into 24, and we should be accumulating cash, which would then accommodate the debt prepayment at a future point in time. All right, so nothing really interesting going on with this district. It is also outside of its expenditure period, just like TIDs 3 and 4, so no new projects can occur. All right. You're missing TID 6? I'm missing TID 6. All right. Thank you for that. TID 6 is a blight district. I apologize if it's not in your packet. Maybe you inserted it? You have it. Okay. I'm missing a page, so I apologize. I had to turn to the wrong side. I got too many pages here. All right, TID 6 is page 6 of your handout, and also mine. I'm just going in the opposite direction here. Blight District created in 2009. The distinction in a blight district is that it's a 27-year district on an unextended basis. That would mean a final year of revenue collection in 2037. All right, so TID 6 does have a current deficit balance, but is producing positive cash flow. Even with the degradation in value that you're seeing from 24 to payable 25. All right, so we do have debt outstanding that is payable from TID 6. There are a few general obligation bonds, 2013, 2016, and 2018 that were used to fund infrastructure projects in TID 6. There's also some development agreements that should be retired with payments in 2024. Again, we're always accruing administrative costs. This district is still in its expenditure period, so it could take on new projects if the council so desired to move forward with any. Over the course of time here, we do have positive cash flow. We do also have surplus, and you'll see on the agenda later on that we're looking to make this district a potential donor to a handful of other districts. Questions, comments? All right. Now we'll move on to TID 7. TID 7 is also a blight district created in 2009, August of 2009 to be exact. Final revenue year of 2037, just like TID 6. The current value is a little over $8.5 million. This is an eligible recipient of transfers from both 3 and 4. I'm not sure that's ever been leveraged. Maybe once in the past those relationships were put in place some time ago. In any event, not required at the present time. We do have some debt outstanding. There's a 2017 issue of bonds, payments of which range from about $12,000 to $14,000 per year. I did mention the 2022 note and that a number of the other TIF districts had an allocable share of that. That note was extended essentially an additional 3 years here just recently, so you're seeing the actual payment requirements. There is a balloon that will come due in 2027. And over the course of the next couple years, we'll be looking for an opportunity to put that into permanent financing with defined principal amortization attached to it. There is sufficient cash flow to meet the payment requirements until the balloon date as it stands right now. And ostensibly, even with additional interest expense on the permanent financing, there should be a positive cumulative balance at the end. Right now, we're projecting it. There would obviously be additional interest cost on permanent financing of the million-plus balloon due in 27. But we should be in fine shape. And again, TID 7 is on the docket for a potential donor to a number of other districts. All right, TID 8, also a blight district. Created in 2011, would be final year of revenue collection in 2039. Also, an eligible recipient of shared revenue from tax increment district number 3. That has been utilized in the past, and we are projecting that to continue through the end of TID 3. That support is needed. This district is presently projected to be in deficit. As a blight district, it's also an eligible recipient for shared revenues from these other TIDs that we're looking at later on in the agenda. There is an advance outstanding from the general fund. When you're seeing advances shown, the general fund has been the source of that funding by and large over time, and so through positive cash flow for this district the next few years and some sharing, we're looking to hopefully buy down the advance essentially. There will also be a balloon due on the extension of the 2024 note. So with our debt outstanding that requires payment, 17, 18, 20, 21 bonds, we'll be looking to service that debt and then also extend that balloon on the 24 note here at some point. Again, cumulative deficit balance will require some support from other TIDs, although TID 8 has been relatively successful the last few years in accreting in value as well. All right. Once we get past TID 9 and 10, I'd say we're on the down slope. So TID 9, another blight district created in 2013, final year of revenue collection in 2041. TID 9 has kind of ebbed and flowed from having a zero value to a few $100,000 over the past number of years. Its value has been static year over year, 24 and a 25. There have been transfers in the past from TID 4, which is the only current eligible donor district. Ultimately, we will need additional support, and for TID 9, it'll be more meaningful. Again, as a redevelopment area, especially in the downtown specifically, it can be difficult to create value because you've already got really a built-out area, and as you're making improvements, oftentimes it requires you to demolish property, sometimes acquire property that was taxable, which then becomes tax exempt. So these dynamics, when you bring them all into play, mean they do need additional support. They also require, a lot of times, a heavy amount of investment. In this case, there is some debt outstanding. We can get close to the payment requirements, but certainly not enough. Again, we do have an allocable portion of the 2024 note anticipation note, which does have that balloon structure as a kind of a quasi-interim financing. In this case, we've got a deeper deficit on a prospective basis, so I would expect that we would have a higher level of support for this district from the eligible donors than some of the others. All right.
Brian,
Yep.
I think Shannon, and you're new from last time you guys weren't on Joint Review Board. Would it help to describe where these areas are for you, I mean, as far as the TIDs?
I see there's maps in the back. of the
Okay.
packet.
I just see a kind of,
Yeah.
trying to think through the, Renee, you're,
Yeah, that's what I was doing, was scrolling.
Yeah, so there's
Okay.
maps of them on page 170-ish
okay,
over there, but thank you.
yep.
There are some maps. In the past, we've had, the city's actually quite large geographically, and we've had these laid out. They become kind of hard to see all in one place. So, yes, if you do have questions, I think the two of you would be better able to describe where these are. I'm sure the mayor has some history too and can describe where these locations are. All right, TID 10, a blight district created in 2015, final year of revenue collection in 2043. Current certified value is just over $8.5 million. Produces a healthy, roughly $190,000 of revenue. As I stated, there was a 2022 state trust fund loan issued and payable from TID 10. There's also the 2024 note. Also has a balloon structure. In this case, this is going to be a relatively well-performing district even when that balloon gets extended. What we'll end up doing is using and leveraging this district as a donor, most likely. The expenditure period does not end until 2037, and with any of the donors, there's always the choices around additional expenses in the district versus the sharing relationships. And so the sharing can really be think of it as an appropriation where the council makes decisions on an annual basis. And in fact, for most places where we work, there's dialogue that goes on throughout the course of any calendar year based upon changes that occur, whether it be changes in values that occur in August. We'll get new tax rates, we'll update. We'll typically get the audit at some point throughout the year, and so we make updates to freshen up the forecast, so to speak. All right, TID 11. Also a very healthy district, mixed-use district, created in 2016, final year of revenue collection in 2038. Value has been consistently increasing over time with new development, and presently just over $20 million. That produces about $440,000 in revenue. There is debt outstanding, 21 tax increment revenue bond, as well as two general obligation bonds, one from 17, one from 2020. There was also an allocable share of a recent issue of general obligation notes here in 2024, and a retirement of its portion of the 2022 note anticipation note. So there should be some strong free cash flow from this district on an annual basis. There was an advance outstanding as of the end of 22. I would argue as we get into 24 and 25, likely that advance will be exhausted with the dollars flowing back to the general fund and to the unassigned fund balance. Again, the city can make some decisions in terms of how that annual surplus is allocated, whether it pays for advances or accumulates a balance. Questions? All right. TID 12. Mixed-use district created in 2017, final year of revenue collection in 38. The value did decline by about half year over year this past year. And so again, one of the ones where we'll be keeping an eye on it and seeing what the value shakes out in August of this next calendar year to get a better sense of the stabilized value on a go-forward basis. There is some debt outstanding, not a lot otherwise going on in this district at the present time. There's a small portion of roughly $2 million of GO bonds from 2019. Expenditure period ends in 2032. There's a nominal cash balance outstanding, and we should be seeing that grow over time to some degree as well. All right, last two, TID 13. TID 13 is an industrial district, also a 20-year district similar to a mixed-use district. Created in 2021, final year of revenue collection is in 2041. Very small amount of value presently. The last couple districts have been in moments in time where the city has gone below what's commonly called the 12% threshold. Talk about that here. As much as you'd like, of course, the city's presently over 12%, which means no new tax increment districts, can't create any new ones, can't amend the boundaries to add territory. All of the existing districts can stay open, can still execute on their project plans, et cetera, but there have been a couple times in the past few years, dating back to 2021, where the city has dipped below, and we've identified some opportunities to then create a new district where it might be warranted in terms of development opportunities. TID 13 was one of those. So again, this district at the present time will have no revenue for 25. And again, it's been kind of up and down the last few years. So the goal will be to produce enough revenue to cover just the kind of the annual admin costs, which have been pretty nominal the last couple of years. TID 14, mixed-use district created in 2021 alongside TID 13. For payable 25, the value's $430,000. Really should be about enough to cover its cost. And again, you know, a small advance outstanding that we'd be looking to chip away at with any positive cash flow over time. Any questions on TID 14 or any kind of broader questions regarding the current and open tax increment districts? All right, very good. I think the only item related to this really is consideration of a resolution that just recognizes that the city held its annual required meeting of the Joint Review Board, and there are some additional agenda items to follow. You know what, actually, we're good. There's no requirement to adopt the resolution. That's usually just something that we sometimes tag. Oh, there it is. All right, we can move on to items 3 and 4, if the chair's comfortable with that. All right, very good. All right, the meat of the rest of the agenda requires action items on the part of the Joint Review Board, and I'll walk you through these first two being extensions to TIDs 4 and 9. There's a provision under law that's commonly referred to as Act 145. If you go back in time, that occurred in 2013 and affected the tax levies in 2014. At that time, the state included additional funding and aids for the technical college districts, which generally resulted in reductions in levies and tax rates at for all technical college jurisdictions across the state. One of the, I think, trades in that regard in terms of that enabling legislation was a recognition that tax increment districts that were open at that time would be negatively impacted because tax increment revenue is really passive in that all the jurisdictions set their levies. You then determine the equalized tax rate by jurisdictions, add that all up, apply it to the captured tax increment value, And the end result is the revenue collection for all tax increment districts in individual jurisdictions, and then it's apportioned by value at that point. And so the requirement here is really to kind of go back in time to that moment and essentially prove out that the local jurisdiction, in this case the city of Merrill, was essentially harmed, for lack of a better term. And so the math does bear out. You can see that when you, if you look at the attachments to the memo that was prepared and circulated, that there was a reduction in tax increment collections. You basically run it side by side. What would have been with and without? Obviously, it has to be on a forecasted basis. And so as long as you prove that, you essentially have met the requirements under law. And so then you come before the Joint Review Board to get the consent to enact the extension, which is for a 3-year period. The resolution itself is kind of set up as a template and available to all jurisdictions on a kind of fill-in-the-blank basis. And so that was also provided in the distribution to all of the Joint Review Board members. And so the same extension is being sought for both TIDS 4 and TID 9. I think we could see from TID 9 that it's projected to be in deficit. The deficit isn't required for this sort of extension. Same thing for TID 4. Again, we're kind of expecting that value to come back at least a little bit, but the 3-year extension would also allow it to recover its costs in full, without doubt, really. Any questions on the extensions? All right, then you have action items on your agenda for for both extensions under 3 and 4 of the agenda.
Chair, may I ask a question?
Yes.
What would be the negative impact to not doing the extension?
Big picture, in terms of TID 4, there's a possibility that the city does not recover all its costs, which would impact the general fund at least to some degree. The city's trying to recover all its costs, including advances from the general fund as a source of internal funding. Similarly with TID 9, we're going to try to rely on the donor districts to provide a level of support. The extension allows for the ability to potentially amortize debt over a longer period, which does increase interest, but it does reduce the annual payment requirements. So from a risk profile perspective, that tends to be a positive for the local jurisdiction. I would say big picture, that district's also within its expenditure period, which doesn't expire until 2035. So there's still some runway there for additional projects potentially related to economic development. I think big picture from the overlapping jurisdictions perspective, you want healthy underlying jurisdictions from a fiscal profile perspective, and you want to provide the greatest opportunities for additional developments. For communities that are tipped out over the 12%, a longer runway can be helpful. We do have developers come in and want to discuss these things, and opportunities are curtailed to some degree because of the length of time that tax increment can be received. And so whether that's the local jurisdiction potentially funding projects itself, or agreeing to reimburse a developer, or providing some level of public assistance, the time is the maximum allowable time is always a benefit in terms of being longer than shorter.
Anything else?
Brian, you touched on it as far as the value drop in TID 4 was substantial to the point where we may not be able to cover project costs in that TID.
It's possible. I think we all feel reasonably good about the notion that it's going to recover to the point where it is going to recover all its costs, but you can't know with certainty until values come out in August. And there's really not a lot of time left in the event that it doesn't. So again, with the extensions, they're available to be leveraged and used for the full 3 periods, but no local jurisdiction that takes the extension or is authorized to use the extension is required to keep the district open for the entirety of the extension period.
So, Mr. Chair, are you looking for a motion to approve the TID 4 extension?
Yes.
This is Chet Strebe. I would so make that motion to approve the TID 4 technical college extension resolution.
I would second that.
I have a motion and a second to approve the TID 4 extension resolution. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next, we'll consider an approval of TID 9 Technical College Extension Resolution.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the TID 9 Technical College Extension Resolution. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next, we'll review and discuss the draft project plans for TID numbers 6, 7, 11, and 12.
All right, very good. I'll kind of talk about all of these very similarly, because essentially we're looking to exercise authority under the same section of law and for essentially the same purpose across all of TID 6, 7, 11, and 12. In this instance, we're looking to make those districts eligible donors to TIDs 8, 9, and 10. The prerequisite there is that in order to share increment with the district, one of the eligible recipient district types is a blight district. So we satisfy that requirement. Prospectively, some of these districts could be more meaningful than others. Again, we're in a period of flux here in terms of the potential demand for the sharing requirements. I think the ones we're focusing on most would be 8 and 9, although 10 has a longer runway with the expenditure period, and there have been some demands on additional potential for infrastructure. So we meet all of the requirements under statute. The other prerequisite really has to do with the fact that all the districts reside, the donor and recipient reside in the same overlying taxing jurisdictions. As you're aware, some local jurisdictions, cities and villages, are in different counties or school districts. And so in this case, we're all in the same taxing jurisdictions across all of the tax increment districts. We don't have that sort of situation. So fundamentally, from a statutory requirement perspective, we satisfy all of the requirements under law. The 12% test doesn't apply to what are essentially project plan amendments, which we're adding the sharing or the transfers of surplus revenues to the recipient district as eligible project costs of TID 6, 7, 11, and 12. Much like the extensions, there is no, even though the donor relationships are established, there is no fundamental requirement that sharing occurs. And just like any other place that has these sorts of relationships, these are reviewed on an annual and even throughout the year basis. So we do try to look forward in time to identify the needs of the recipient districts and then prioritize the sharing amongst those districts that are best able to handle it, even though all of them are eligible. Maybe I'll see if there are any questions that I might be able to address.
Good.
Does this process then extend the life of that TID? Okay.
It does not. There was a point in time where the distress designation was available. When you made a district a donor to a distressed or severely distressed district, that did extend the life of the donor to the lesser of 10 years or the maximum extended life of the recipient district, which that extends 10 years as well. So that does not occur in these sorts of situations. You're limited to the life of the donor district.
Any further questions?
This does not require any action of us tonight, though.
These do require action of the joint review. Not tonight. No, I'm sorry. Thank you for that. That will be on a subsequent meeting. This is the organizational meeting for that purpose, but we're also doing the annual meeting requirement at that point in time too. So The extensions are only the Joint Review Board acting. There's no requirement of the council to act on those. Those are at the Joint Review Board's discretion. The donor amendments, yes, this is the first step in a multi-step process. Thank you for that. Following this meeting, there'll subsequently be a meeting of the Redevelopment Authority, who are really standing in place of the Plan Commission, which would normally take up such action. An RDA can do the same thing. So there'll be a public hearing. The RDA will take action on its own resolution that would recommend to the full council then to adopt the resolution, making the district's donors subject to approval by the Joint Review Board at what would be another meeting to occur at a later date. This is informational only, so thank you for that.
Okay. Anything else to add then, Brian, or you good?
I don't have anything else to add, so any additional detail will come at a subsequent time. We'll essentially assemble what I'll call the public record in terms of everything that's, all the notices that have been prepared and sent, and then also the resolutions that would be potentially adopted by both the RDA and the council will be put in front of all of you. You'll note in the draft plans that the city attorney's opinion accompanies both of those, so Attorney Hayden has reviewed everything that's been prepared to date and penned that opinion for all of the districts.
Okay. At this point, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
A motion to adjourn?
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second to adjourn. Any discussion?
Really
Hearing-
appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thank you, Brian.
Thank you all for bearing with me. I'm losing my voice.
All those in favor?
Thanks,
signify by
everyone.
saying aye.
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 Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.